Welcome once again to the pre-recorded Kindred UMC live show. Coming to you pre-recordedly live from Kindred Studio B, aka John Legg's
John's house.
Living room.
The patron saint, John Legg.
The patron saint
Who
of
you all
Kindred
have heard
UMC.
so much about.
I am Chris Hayden. I'm the pastor at Kindred UMC.
Hey, I'm Courtney Young. I'm the director of community engagement at Kindred UMC.
Right, and I guess I'm John Legg, the pastor of Temple Terrace United Methodist Church.
And
that's Louie.
that's Louis.
Special guest
That's
Louis.
right.
That's
Special
Louis.
guest Louis.
We love it.
Taking place of Jonah as the goodest boy.
Aw.
So
Jonah.
we are in the middle of a series. We're in the middle of. We literally just started our first one last week, and it is on our axioms, our core axioms about how we treat each other in discipleship. And so our first one last week was make requests, not demands.
Yep.
And this week, it's going to be a surprise. Let's start with the scripture.
I know what it is, but I'll keep my mouth shut.
You don't say a word.
Okay, I'll be quiet.
Okay, so this week the text is from 2 Corinthians chapter 6. It's a short excerpt, and then we'll give a little bit of context. It's chapter 6, verses 11 through 13, and it goes like this. We have spoken frankly to you, Corinthians. Our heart is wide open to you. There is no restriction in our affections, but only in yours. In return, and I speak to you as children, open wide your hearts also. So, 2 Corinthians is a Pauline epistle. Quick, the Honorable Right Reverend John Legg, can you explain to the people what a Pauline epistle is?
Well, it's a letter written by Paul.
You nailed it.
Thanks.
It sounds like a plant to me.
That sounds like
Pauline
I thought
epistle.
pollen,
Pauline epistle.
like
Yes, pollen
It's very
allergies.
epistle.
thorny
Yeah.
and lives in
It's
the
prickly.
desert southwest.
Yes,
Yeah.
there you go.
It's
Also
a great
known
description.
as a Pauline epistle.
Perfect.
So this is the second letter to the church in Corinth that Paul, and also he has a co-writer, Timothy, is writing. So he started a church.
Okay.
This is awkward because I know you know all this.
I don't know any of this, so you can talk to me. It's fine.
Normally I'm talking to two people who are
To me and
actually like
Preston.
giving new information.
You can just share it with me.
Yeah, so this is a second letter that Paul has written to a church in Corinth, which is a city in Rome.
Okay.
That he started and then, got it going, and then he goes off to start other churches. That was kind of his whole MO.
Okay.
And then every once in a while, these churches kind of get off track.
Right.
And one of the conflicts in this particular letter has to do with people were starting to really question, by what authority does Paul come around and tell us how to do that? And so a lot of, the 2 Corinthians is actually kind of interesting because it's a little bit of a, Paul's going you want to question me, do you? And then he writes this big long letter.
Right.
And so his statement to the church in Corinth in this particular excerpt, it's a big letter. He writes a lot. But in this particular statement, he's making this point about so his credibility is being questioned,
Mm-hmm.
and his authority is by which authority do you preach this gospel? And he's making this point hey, listen, I've shown you everything. You have my whole heart. I've opened it wide open, but you aren't coming to the table in the same way. You're hiding and you're being shadowy, and open your heart up, and welcome to our second axiom.
Oh, I know what it is.
Well, you want to say it?
Courageously bring your whole self to the conversation.
Yes. So there's something going on here with people not being willing to really share what's really going on, and yet they're also accusing and kind of combating.
I think we live in a culture where it's way easier and more convenient to put the mask on and work the room than it is to actually be honest with how you're feeling and what's really going on. Because our culture, at least, for me growing up, it's taught me that vulnerability is not something that's wanted or accepted, and smile and put the happy face on and everything's okay and it all works out. And it's I don't know, there's a lot of power in letting that guard down a little bit and actually being honest with how you feel.
Yeah, so the mask thing.
Yeah.
Like I want to ask, like, so because a mask covers something.
Sure.
So, like it begs the question, what's it cover?
I mean, for me in my own personal life, like, I'm very much a people pleaser. I'm very much I just want to see everybody else happy because it's way easier to focus on you and your needs than it is to like actually look at and reflect on mine.
For you particularly.
For me in particular. Yeah. I mean, I'm an Enneagram too. That's part of it. But like as a human.
We've had a lot of conversations about the Enneagram recently.
Yes. But that's part of it.
John, how do you feel about the Enneagram?
Well, I think I just said so. Yeah.
But I'm very I just want to keep everybody happy. It's way easier to talk about you than it is to talk about me, and it's because.
So that's the mask, because
Yeah.
what does that protect?
I think
do
it's for me personally, and I don't know about everybody else, but for me, it's definitely rejection. I'm terrified that if I show who I really am and I'm honest about who I really am, that means people aren't going to love me or like me anymore.
And I think that is a valid fear.
Yeah.
That's
Who
kind
doesn't
of
feel that way?
right.
Who doesn't feel that way?
Like, yeah, there's a really serious risk. It's not like, it would be so much easier if it was, hey, that's all in your head.
Right.
When you completely show yourself for who you really are, everyone's going to stand up and applaud and love you. And it's like, yeah, sometimes that happens, but then also the exact opposite happens sometimes.
Way more frequently.
Yeah, so it's a harder ask to follow this axiom because it is actually risky.
Right.
It can lead to rejection. It can lead to confrontation. It can lead to, fill in the blank for whatever your particular kind of worst fear is socially. It can lead to that.
Yeah.
And so now we're saying and I know that's your worst fear, but I promise it's even worse to not be who you really are and bring who you really are, who you're called to be, who you're created to be, to whatever situation that you find yourself in. Mm-hmm. And it's a much harder ask.
Yeah.
All you're doing is kicking the can down the road.
Yeah.
For something you're going to have to address later anyway, and then you've built up false expectations, false relationships, and then you have to dismantle all that to get to the truth of who you are. The thing that's
or you don't.
Well,
and it just kind of keeps going that way.
Well, right.
And I think it leads to depression and
kick the
anxiety.
can down the road.
Right, yeah,
Right.
and there is this weird option that we all have to just never really deal with anything.
And I think I'm not sure it's always as dire as that if you don't do this, then the whole world's going to collapse. Nah, you can continue to pretty much just be meh.
Yeah.
But is meh enough for you? And is that what God wants for us scripturally? And I would say, of course not. God wants something that's more abundant and more authentic than that. But it's akin to numbing yourself with whatever you use to do that. That I can numb myself from the reality of being honest and be meh.
Yeah.
But that has its own tendrils.
Meh so it's something we used to say when I was a chaplain all the time, and I think we said this at South Shore. You can't selectively choose what you numb.
Right.
You can't just be I'm gonna numb my abusive childhood.
Yeah.
Right.
And then I'll be free to be completely here for my adult relationships. It just doesn't work that way. That's not the way human psychology works. Mm-hmm. If you numb one thing, you necessarily are numbing everything.
Yeah,
and that's the meh.
It's sandpaper on the whole self.
Yeah.
Well, and also I don't know about you guys or everybody else, but for me, my thing is I will always fight for other people. They deserve someone that's in their corner. They deserve someone that's going to be there for them. But what I've come to realize in the last 2 or 3 years of intentional work on myself is being in someone's corner means that you're inherently honest even when it's hard. It means that you're not just genuinely listening for them to respond or say how they feel, but that you're also adding in how you feel in a way that's helpful and loving and whatever by being
At least
yourself.
intended to be.
Yes, because sometimes you say things and it doesn't go the way you want it to.
Yeah, that's the second risk, is that like you could be totally wrong and clumsy about what you're saying, and there is the potential to cause harm.
Yeah, I had a conversation with a friend recently where, they were asking me like, hey, I want to bring this person on this trip with me. How do you feel about that? And I had a moment of anxiety where I was like, I'm not really friends with this person. This makes me kind of uncomfortable. Do I lie and say, yeah, that's fine, whatever, no worries? Or do I like be honest about how I'm feeling? And I like sat and thought about it. I actually called Chris about it, and I was like,
yeah, okay.
You know what?
I know what you're talking about.
I'm going to be honest. And it was clunky because that's new for me. Like to actually risk losing a friendship by being like, hey, like this makes me kind of uncomfortable and this is why, like, that's very intimidating for me.
Also, like, I think there's something about that person was also, we do discipleship groups where we specifically work on these things, and that person is an active participant in the discipleship group.
Absolutely.
And there was this kind of like common vocabulary, which I think helped a lot.
Oh, absolutely, 100%. But like, I remember sitting there before I sent that text and being like, do I really want to be honest with this person, or do I want to just brush it off and say it's fine?
I apologize for being vague, but obviously confidentiality is really important. Like, we have to be vague with the details.
Right. But like, I remember like sitting and just being like, well, shit. Like, if I'm honest, I risk losing this friendship because I'm like expressing a need, which like sounds really extra and out there, but like for me, it was like, well, like, I had spent so much of my life making myself smaller and people-pleasing to accommodate other people that this was like a really big deal for me. And so then, I was honest and...
I don't think you're an outlier. I think it is hard, so I've been practicing this for a long time. This is one of the big things we worked on in CPE, and I was a chaplain for a year at Tampa General.
Sure.
We looked it's intense stuff, and this was one of the main things we worked on.
Yeah.
And it is hard and scary for me.
Yeah.
I don't think you're an outlier.
Yeah, I mean, most of my trauma is surrounded around abandonment, neglect, that kind of thing. So I think you're right that a lot of people do go through that.
Yeah.
But it was like, I remember like, and this is even after I had been like actively practicing, how am I going to do this? And like, it still was like very scary. And it ended up great. It ended up being better than I could have ever imagined it would go, because this friend and I talked it out, and we expressed, hey, we're both new to this. And this was to your original point of like, sometimes it's going to be clunky. Like, I was honest and expressed my feelings, and maybe that came out a little clunkier than I would have wanted it to. But to put myself out there and then to be able to have a conversation with that person and actually talk it out and feel it out was like incredibly helpful in my own personal growth.
So does that bring up any? Can you think of a time, John, when you've had to have like an honest conversation and it's either gone well or bad? Because like it can go both ways.
Well, I think the thing that's most difficult in that is that you're in your own ethic saying, I'm going to bring my whole self. And of course, it's only the self you're actually aware of. So it's not your whole self. It's
right.
your best guess at that
yeah.
Sure.
in any given moment. Is that you're engaging with someone who you're hoping is going to meet you on that same ball field, but they're playing to a different set of rules. They're unwilling, or at least maybe in that point, unable. And so how do you have grace in the middle of that for where that other person is?
Yeah.
When you're trying so hard and going, oh man, I risked so much, and then you did that,
Well, so this is actually because the one of the third parts that I wanted to get to, you're bringing up really well. Taking the other person's capacity or maybe their intentions, like. And also your own intentions into account,
right?
Isn't it like this particular statement about courageously bring your whole self to the car? It doesn't exist in isolation. Like, it's undergirded by a bunch of other ones about humility and empathy and
right.
like. So I want to be careful because it's not. There is a fear that somebody could just zero in on this and then be like, okay, I'm going to go back to my like abusive boyfriend and be like, I love
Right.
you, and then submit myself to more abuse.
That's not what we're talking about.
Or
Right.
the opposite, where it's like, I don't care what anybody thinks. I'm going to say this about those people.
And that's very popular right now. Speak your truth.
Yeah.
Speak your truth. And to me, that just doesn't sound right. And,
Right.
and I haven't done any work to unpack that, and I don't think I can give some amazing, hey, let me tell you, this is my teaching on that. It just doesn't sound right. The part that's kind of scary, and I'm glad that you said it's the empathy and humility that are parts that intertwine in the middle of this, is that you engage another person and you're operating based on, I'm bringing my whole self to the conversation, and you are an inanimate thing that I am talking to and
Yeah.
speaking
You're just an
to.
object in my world.
Right,
Yeah.
and you are not an entity that can speak in and reflect to me, and I'm changed because of this conversation. And so when it's the it versus the you,
Right.
everything shifts, and we have to, okay, so who am I in the lens of this other person, and how do we find common ground in the middle of this? And not, poor you're not as self-aware as I am. The moment we jump to that place, conversation's
Well,
over.
it's like literally the definition of judgment. It's
Yes.
like looking down your nose. Like it's the opposite of what we stand for,
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's important to label that, because there's the axiom that's helpful, and then there's the what kind of are we really talking about? Like what are the circumstances that commonly occur where this comes up? And usually it has something to do with the thing that you're afraid to talk about with the person you love.
Yep.
The thing when you have a trusting relationship or a friendship or
Well, it's people pleasing. It's people pleasing. It's not wanting to hurt people's feelings. It's this is my own soapbox, but like it's minimizing yourself to fit the needs and expectations of other people, and forcing yourself into a box that you weren't asked to be forced into because you're scared of hurting somebody you care about.
Yeah, and some of the tool belt stuff too so one of the phrases that we always talk about associated with this particular axiom is, and I hope this demonstrates the humility in it too, because we don't want to encourage people to enter that nose down kind of
Right.
stance. But like one of the phrases, it's very basic. It's a counseling phrase. It's when X happened, I felt
feel
Y.
Y.
Like, yeah, like it's not making, because this combines well with take responsibility for your own feelings. Yeah, which is another axiom that we're going to talk about. But so like this is not an excuse to make other people responsible for how you feel, except in extreme circumstances. Obviously, if somebody comes in the room and is like, "You're just a piece of shit and I hate you," it's like, well, okay, you're a little responsible for how I feel
rewind
about that.
that.
Yeah, like this isn't. You shouldn't do that. That's
Right.
wrong. But when somebody is genuinely, honestly, just kind of like being, and something happens where I feel either angry or offended or hurt or whatever, but I don't want to engage that person because I'm afraid of what it
we
might mean.
experience
Or,
this even in our disciple groups, where that is a space for people to bring their whole selves to the conversation.
Yeah, that's
and
literally the point
there's
of those
a little bit of
covenant relationships.
hesitancy when it comes time for I mean, again, I'm speaking for myself, not for everybody else, but for me, like, it's a struggle to, like, if I sense conflict, to be honest about that conflict that I'm sensing, because I don't want to hurt the other person's feelings and I don't want there to be conflict, and conflict is uncomfortable. But it's also kind of like a necessary part of growing and learning and existing.
Yeah, I think it's better.
For sure. It's harder.
It is harder.
It's a lot harder, but
Right.
it's definitely better.
The piece for me that at the beginning was, as I was trying to understand, and again, I don't know kind of all the other pieces that you're putting into this, is the sense of I bring my full self means I bring my agency and my agenda. And me telling you my feelings is my agenda, that you need to understand how I'm feeling. That to me is the broken piece in the middle of using that as a club rather than as an invitation to deeper conversation and deeper connection. So that the saying how you feel is good when it's, I just need to tell you how I'm feeling, and I'm willing to accept and receive what you have to say to me so we can engage,
Yes.
versus I want to tell you how I feel and you have to accept that and therefore feel badly because you've made me feel bad.
And that's making a demand.
I was just going to say that ties into what we talked about last week about making requests and not demands.
Everything works better when we're genuinely... So I remember talking with you when I was my first marriage, and like I can't remember if it was specifically when we were talking about just me in general, or me specifically, or if we were just talking about marriage in general. But I remember one of the things you said that was very helpful. That's like sometimes in a marriage, it's very helpful to just acknowledge that it's completely possible that you could separate. Mm-hmm. Like that is a real possibility. It is not like a death sentence. It is that is a real and like as long as you're avoiding that truth, then you can't really reconcile. Like it's hard, or at least it's harder to reconcile until you acknowledge the reality of this. And there's something about that I think is tied to this. Like, so it is certainly not about imposing your will and your feelings and your perspective in an oppressive way onto other people, but it is also offering, this is my perspective and it is part of the conversation, and it deserves to be taken seriously. And again, some of this isn't like, maybe it'd be better if we just like let's just hold all of these and then we'll release them all at once, But I agree with you. That is the one thing, and especially in our discipleship groups,
I think it goes hand in hand with the make requests, not demands.
Well, and I get nervous too about the. It is difficult for most people to offer loving critique to another person who has asked for it.
Yes.
Like even in a context where we're going, I am opening up because I do want perspective that I don't have. Like I do, like even when somebody does that, it still hurts and it's still risky and it's still a little dangerous.
I still get anxious about receiving criticism. I just don't take it well. I have a very hard time with it. And like I know that's not me saying like I'm so good, I don't need criticism. Like that's not it at all. It's just that genuinely like I have had to learn to separate criticism from how they view and think about me as a human being. Like criticism is meant to help me grow and to be better. It's not I hate. Yes.
We're flawed.
Sure.
Yeah, we're flawed
when
people.
done with kindness.
When done with kindness.
Good and hard.
But it's not meant to attack me as a person. And again, that's centered around my own history of abuse and my own trauma of thinking like, okay, when someone criticizes me and says, Courtney, you're too much, you can't do this, that was an attack on me personally. And separating that from, hey, maybe like don't be the first person to speak all the time, or hey, maybe like let's learn to actively listen to other people instead of like always offering what you have to say. Like those are two very different things, like it's not always about who you are as a person and how you're bad and how you're wrong so much as it is about, hey, how can I help you, and like how can I help you grow in this moment?
There's something too about coming humbly.
Yes,
if you're
for sure.
So like one
humbly.
There's so helpful phrases. This is language we use all the time. So I have a hunch.
Yeah.
Which is like, I'm not claiming this as some major statement.
Truth.
I'm just saying, hey, I have a hunch. I could be wrong.
This isn't a gotcha podcast.
Yeah, that's something I say all the time. This isn't a gotcha podcast. If you don't want to answer this, that's fine. Or if you want to edit this out later, that's also fine.
Right.
Which we've literally had happen before.
Multiple times.
And then the other thing too is like, I find that phrasing things, even if I'm saying them as a statement, and I say it all the time, I'm going to say this as a statement. I really mean it as a question because I could be way off here. So please tell, I need to process it in a statement because that's how my brain works and I process out loud. But like always kind of having a humility in the like, it's not my job to define you. I'm here to try and offer
Yeah.
what I think I'm seeing.
Well, and I think that's the key difference is being able to like be humble about it. And
Well, it goes back to
truly-
what you were saying. Is like when you say your full self, that's a kind of an impossible task. Like you're never aware of your full self.
Yeah, it's the best you have at the moment.
Yeah.
Two things come to mind. One is more to what you were just saying, and one of the things that I went through, the leader David Dodge said one of the axioms we worked on in this group together was, when you ask someone a question, it has to be an honest question, and it must be a question that only the person you are asking has the answer to. Goodness gracious, that's our dog. That to ask a question that you think you know the answer to, and you're just trying to get the person to say it, that's not an honest question. That's a
Right.
leading question, and it almost leads to your pricing a
Yeah.
demand, right? So you have to be honestly curious about, I really wonder this, and you're the only person that has the answer to this, and then give the person space
Dude, I
to
might
answer
change one
as
of
they're
our
able.
axioms from. So one of the other axioms we're going to talk about is
Curious empathy.
Practice curious empathy with open questions is what, and I think I'm going to change that to honest questions.
Yeah, I like that better.
And the key is, the only person that knows the answer to it is the person you're asking. And if
Love
you
that.
if you think you know the answer, don't ask
Yeah.
that question, because you're trying to manipulate. And so that was a huge kind of new piece for me, just in my personal growth. So to back up, and I didn't have a moment to say this, I'm just trying to think of, okay, so when have I practiced this, or when has it been practiced on me, and when was it good and healthy and all of that. The best example I can think of. Oh my God. So.
You come by it on, I come by it honest.
So
This is where I learned it, everyone. This is where it comes from.
well, it's tender and it's beautiful. So
Yeah.
Latrice and I, this is maybe our second
Your
argument.
wife.
My wife, yeah, our second argument ever. And she's a better communicator than I am, and is willing to do the things I think you're encouraging other people to do. And so it's in our home, and it's been an evening of kind of walking past each other and, closing doors more loudly than we
Yeah.
ought to, that kind of
Yikes.
stuff. And as good a communicators as we are, and as practiced as we had been in our relationship, we were at this moment where we couldn't talk to each other. And the key to unlock the conversation was her saying, how's that for a dramatic pause? Her saying, I don't want to fight with you. How do we not fight? Okay. On this we can agree. So if we're not going to fight, how are we going to be together? And that safety of, this is not what I want. I'm not ready to punish you. I'm not ready to call you guilty or whatever. Or even her coming, what did I do wrong? Tell me and I'll fix it. Oh God, save us from that.
Yeah.
It was this honest, this is not who we want to be together, is
Yeah.
it?
Yeah.
Is it what you want? I'm like, well, no, of course it's not what I want.
Right.
So let's get over the fear of, oh my God, we're fighting. And how do we do that?
I think
well?
there's something so like powerful and valuable in that. Like hearing you tell that story makes me think of, my own stuff. Like I think the thing that so many people are scared of is like, oh God, this is a fight and I don't want to fight with you. I don't want to argue with you. I don't want to make you feel bad. Like, what do we do? And so people lean into these heavy, like, it's okay, I'm good.
Well, and I think that's a fair outcome. In this moment, I was mad at her and I wanted her to feel bad. And she was mad at me and wanted me to feel bad. And we're in this place of, in our anger in this moment, we don't know how to get past that and get at something healthy.
Yeah.
Because right now we want to hurt each other.
Yeah.
Which is really not like us at all.
Right.
And so, just
Well,
the unlocking of saying,
I love the how do we do that? Like I love
Yeah.
the question of
There's
it.
something so honest and like genuine about it.
Because particularly knowing that the other person is in a similar place of like, I want you to feel bad about it.
Yes, yeah, of course.
And like submitting to okay, I'm going to ask the person that I'm pretty sure wants me to feel bad. I'm going to ask them a pretty honest question that's going to reveal that I don't know what I'm doing. Like,
Yeah, and
I don't want to fight.
hers
How do
wasn't
I
a
do
question. It was a statement. I don't want to fight with you.
But
Which is,
followed up with, how do we not fight?
well, that was not said.
Oh, okay.
That was the implicit feeling of that just took kind of the released the pressure from this shaken up bottle of Coke.
Yeah.
That, oh yeah, I don't want that either. So why are we stomping around the house at each other, upset and letting our feelings eke out in ways that are hurtful and destructive? And of course, in retrospect, I think I'm using beautiful language maybe to talk about all of that. Man, it was messy and stupid, and I felt like I was 13. And even in the middle of stomping around upstairs, I'm going, why am I doing this? And I don't know if you've ever felt this way. You're doing something is hurtful and destructive to someone you love, and you're just going to do it anyway. Because you just can't get past the whatever it is. And so Latrice was perfect in her timing, in the rhythm of the evening to have that conversation. Now, if she'd have said that 20 minutes earlier or 2 hours earlier, I'm not sure I'd have been ready to hear it.
Yeah.
And maybe if it would have gone another 45 minutes, I would have been the person to say it. But just for me in that moment, it was this beautiful kind of, I don't know what to do now, but this is not what I want.
Right.
Was enough to go, then what do we want? And how do we move forward?
Yeah, so I think that's the intended heart of this act. Like that idea right there.
Yep.
Is like a moment of vulnerability where you're really saying to someone that is important to you, this is where I'm at right now. This is what I see, this is how I feel, whatever the circumstances call for. Like that's the real intention behind this.
Yes.
And when we don't do that, it can lead to just kind of passing each other, just missing each other,
And continued woundedness in places where somebody else and yourself feel vulnerable.
Yeah.
And you've probably talked about the bruising and the sensitivity that me punching you once ain't so bad.
Right.
But then I punch you again in the same spot, and then again and again and again and again, and eventually you are so sore and tender that even if I reach out and touch you with a gentleness, you're like, ow, what the heck?
Yeah.
And
even emotion towards it is a flinch.
yeah. Oh God, you're gonna hit me again.
Yeah.
And yes,
Why are you biting?
Yeah. That little jab, and there's way just, in my opinion, way too much of that right now. It's in our humor. It is the way in which we're masking all of these really broken places in our society and in racial relations and in political stuff and all of that, is that we throw these little jabs and we kind of laugh about them, and we don't realize we are creating huge bruised places in our relationships with others, in our society. The people that your church is aimed at reaching have received that from the church over decades. They have been slightly bruised and slightly punched. Never so much so that they walk out of the church going, screw these people, how dare they say this to me?
Well,
Many
many do. Many do.
Well, maybe they got there.
Yeah.
But, being inside of the traditional church, folks have gotten to this place of woundedness and sensitivity, and you got to be careful. And how do you begin to help people talk about that and say, that was wrong of us. That was wrong the way that we did that, and wrong the way that we talked about that. And how do we grow?
And the confession of, and we've been doing that for a while, and so we don't actually know how to change we don't.
Right.
We need help in how we don't do that, because we don't know a new way to be.
Yep.
Sure.
And so one of the lovely things that I really enjoy about what we're doing is having a lot of feedback from people who are very curious about spirituality and about a relationship with their creator and about a relationship with something redemptive and all of the, but absolutely
not at all
not
interested
churchy.
in church.
Not church. And the ideas and the feedback from that particular crowd, again, that's one of the other things about bringing your full self to the conversation. Again, context of safety, context of people who are not going to slap you in the face for saying it, who genuinely want to receive you. But if people don't do that, then people I grew up in the church. People like me and like you and you grew up in the church. We just don't really have a shot
don't really
at
get
all
it. Yeah.
of communicating the the truth and the holistic idea of good news, because it's just gets wrapped up in a lot of the stuff that we've just messed up for so many years.
I'm in that whole package that you just said, down with all the stuff, the word that got my attention, redemptive. That's the piece. That's it. And that's what makes this different. It's what makes it different than self-help, different than justifying the who I am and the what I'm doing, and bringing the authentic self, my best self, to this whole conversation is really a club to abuse you and to bring an agenda and make a demand. It's what makes, I think, the Christian walk different, is that we're interested in being redeemed.
Well, it's the Christ story. It's the what do you have to die to in order to...
Yeah, we're about the only faith that I know of that worships a man naked on a cross.
Right.
Like the absurdity of and the shame of our God on a cross, and like the reason we worship it is because of what God does with it. Like, because the worst thing in the world becomes the best thing in the world because of grace. Like, that is the Christian story.
I was struck this week in the sanctuary at the church I serve now. Is a stained glass window, and it depicts the Crucifixion. And oftentimes in the church motif, we are seated 75 feet from this cross that's somewhere in the front, right? And in the Crucifixion, and as this stained glass window beautifully depicts, you see Mary standing where her hand is almost touching Jesus' side, and there's another disciple there. And just the juxtaposition of, as I sit 3/4 of the way back in the sanctuary, focused on the platform with the giant cross over the communion table, I look to my right and I see these two people worshiping at Christ's cross, so close that they could touch him, that they could hear his sighs, that they could hear his whisper. And it's different than I think most of us experience in worship, because that happens on the platform. Then there's this third veil of the stage, and then there's the rest of us.
Oh yeah.
No, for sure.
And it's this gruesome, up close, smelly. When someone dies, it ain't pretty.
Yeah, very graphic.
With all of that,
yeah.
Right? And not to mention the Romans had perfected the agony of the cross, and it was on purpose. And to be up close and personal with that, how do you not be transformed? How do you not be transformed by that type of sacrifice? And talk about bringing your whole self to the conversation. That is
sure.
what Jesus was on the cross.
That's a kind of experience that like roots out your whole self too.
Yep.
Like it makes me think of incidents in, like, when I was at the hospital, like trauma alerts and trauma activations, when people come into the ED and like the emergency department, and you're definitely there, and I have a job to do, and also it's like, who can be someone else right now? Like, there's something about being in the presence of such visceral reality, and someone who's genuinely fighting for their life, and a team of people who are fighting for their life also, and like the stakes of there's something about that that's like, who's got time to pretend right now?
Yeah.
Like who can afford to do that? And I think there's it's why I say it all the time. It's why I'm a Methodist and not a Universalist. Like, I need the Christ story.
Yep.
I need an incarnation who is willing to be in that place for creation. I need that story because it necessarily draws out, when you really get into it and engage it, I think it necessarily draws out this, like, I don't know, realness, I guess. Like, all the words I'm trying to come up with feel kind of like tropey about it.
Yeah.
But there is something about that like I need it because I had things that I had to die to that I didn't have the courage to face or feel, or like realities in my own life that I didn't have the power to do. Like,
Hey, Chris, I think it stopped.
no, it's not. It's still go.
Oh, okay.
Anyway,
Sorry.
I will go on. This is probably a good place for us to wrap up anyway.
Well, I have one piece I want to say to that. Please
Okay.
continue your thought.
I don't remember where I was.
I'm sorry.
No,
it
it's
flatlines.
no. It's. I've said it 1,000 times, and it bears repeating. Things that I could not bear to face in my own life, but there would be no healing unless I could face them, and knowing that I would be destroyed by them, because like abuse is a hell of a thing, man. And like going back to those places is inviting self-destruction in a way. And the only way that I could do it is with the confidence of a God who was destroyed on my behalf and risen again and transformed. And like, I needed the promise of that. I needed the promise that when I went back to be destroyed, that I would be raised again, because that's what my God does for me. And that's the business that he is in, you know, like, and like that metaphor is too shallow a word, you know, that like incarnate reality is the essence of why I feel called to do what I do.
And that's beyond a theory of atonement.
Right.
And the theological talk about, well, let's talk about sin and death and, you know, the lamb on the cross and all the things that we've tried to explain.
And here's the mechanics, and there's an angry God, and he doesn't like you very much.
Sure, I know. I know all those things, but there's a mystery in the middle of that is simply kind of what you said. I don't know. I just know that somebody was destroyed on my behalf, and therefore, when I feel destroyed, I know that I can get through it. I think the part that I was going to speak to that just kind of came up was, there are lilies and rainbows and beautiful white, dances that happen on Easter Sunday, and it's this very clean aesthetic, something or other. There's grit and sand, and in birth, there's blood and fluid and crying and purple infants and things that are just like, if you didn't know where the story led, in that moment, you'd be like, oh my God, this is terrible. She's dying.
Yeah.
That's new life.
Yeah.
And new life in these conversations of bringing your whole self, there's a grittiness and there's a purple baby and it's messy and there's crying and there's...
You might take a dump in front of people.
Well, yeah, but we have to hold on to truth or believe that in this redemptive process that the outcome is beautiful and that we get to all the things that come post childbirth, if we're using that as a metaphor. And how do we live into that beauty, trusting that the grit is worth it?
Right.
And the church has just whitewashed that way too much of it.
Oh my gosh,
and
for
the
sure.
first time
The institution.
the first time is hard. The
Right.
first time you really try to engage in that, it's hard, and that's kind of what the church is supposed to be for. It's a community who can hold that space, surround people who are going through that, support each other in the midst of that, reassure, like, I've been through a similar thing.
Yeah.
You're right, it is going to be bloody. It is going to be messy. And I promise, I'm with you. I'm with you. God's with you. We're in this together. Like, I promise this is worth it. I promise there's something redemptive on the other side. Like that's what I think a lot of people are hoping for from discipleship communities.
Yeah.
It reminds me, and again, I use that word grit, and the thing that reminds me, and many of you may have seen it, and it's a remake of a John Wayne film that was out several years ago, and it's called True Grit. And so if you haven't,
the Coen brothers.
I haven't, usual, haven't ever heard of it.
Okay, you watch it, because particularly when it was a John Wayne movie, I'm sure that everyone who went to see that was going to go see a John Wayne movie, where John Wayne was going to be the guy with the true grit, and that ain't it at all. So if you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about, and if you haven't, maybe you should watch it.
Go look it up.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
Both versions are
True
excellent.
grit.
Both
True
versions
grit.
are excellent.
Who has true grit?
Yeah.
All right. Okay. We have gone enjoyably long.
Well
but
surpassed.
I'll wrap it up by saying the benediction that I've been saying once a week since I was in 8th grade. That was
right.
taught to me by this man. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace.
Amen.
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 You're acting like you're somebody else, gets me frustrated.